look at all of this. It's exciting. We cut with so last week we talked about we talked about
That's
cutters.
What you talked about.
Yes, there's a 2-minute video of ums from last week that is absolutely fantastic. I would recommend it all to check it out. It's worth the 2 minutes to make it to the end with the dancing monkey comment. It's fantastic. Yeah. So we talked about cutters last week, and we were kind of doing a back to basics series in the absence of Becky, because I know about basics. So, and I also realized that a lot of this stuff I take for granted that people already know because you're coming into a quilt shop. And I'm like, oh, you already know how to quilt. And some of this information, to me, kind of just sits in the background. And so I thought I would share it. So we cover some of it to, get back to the basics. Some of you might already know a lot of this, but we're going to get into rulers today and just talk about the different types of rulers. And then we're also going to get into half square triangles real quick, because that's one of those things I take for granted that I know how to do, but it's a really good couple quick tools on how to do a quick designs. If you're throwing something together and you got to come up with a 5-inch half square triangle, there's math involved for some people, but I can show you how to do it with no math needed. That being said, let's talk about rulers. We have rulers of all shapes and sizes. I don't know if you saw that earlier. And yeah, if you want to just leave that overhead shot. Yeah, so you can see I've got all sorts of rulers spread out here before me. This here, this is a 8.5 by 4.5 triangle from Creative Grids. This is actually, Brenda gave this to me and said, this is my favorite ruler, and it's also Wilma's favorite ruler. So I thought we'll start with that one. This is a great ruler if you're sitting at your machine cutting, because it's small, easy to move, and it covers most of your sizes. What you're going to find, there's a couple things I like about Creative Grids and something to consider when you're looking at a ruler, because we're going to get into a couple other rulers like my favorite. If you'll notice, this ruler is 5.5 inches wide. The reason that a lot of quilting rulers now are 5.5 inches wide is so depending on which side you measure from, you can get whole inch increments. So if I'm measuring here, this is our 1 inch mark here. So from any time I'm measuring from this edge, I get whole inch increments. And you'll notice it's kind of labeled that way in the white numbers. See, this is what makes Creative Grids nice. Quilter Select are also kind of nice like this as well. So the whole one's white background, whole inch increments coming off of this edge. If I have to cut like a 4.5 inch, say I wanted to do a 2.5 inch strip with this ruler, and I started on the whole increment, I'm going to end up at a halfway point over here. But you do a lot of half-inch cutting in quilting. So what a lot of ruler manufacturers do is on the opposite side, you start at a half-inch increment. So if I was going to do a 2.5 inch strip cut with this ruler, 2.5 falls on a solid line, because we start with the half inch and we come out. And you'll notice up here, I don't think this is coming through, you get half, 1.5, 2.5, 3. So it's labeled so that you can see what those look like. But each side is different, so you have to pay attention to which side you're cutting from. This is the thing that confuses a lot of people. I won't name names because she calls me all the time. She bought a ruler. I don't know how to use this ruler. It's so confusing. I've had that with a couple people. But the thing to keep in mind is with most rulers, not all, there are some that are actual whole inch increments still. Usually you can get those in 5-inch and 6-inch rulers, but a lot of the ruler companies are going to this half-inch increment because it makes it really nice to cut half-inch or whole inch, because you can use these solid lines for that. So you're going to see that on rulers, and you also get the top, the same thing. This is the full inch side. If you flip it over, that's your half-inch side, because you're starting, you can see where that starts. The other thing you're going to also want to look for in a ruler, and again, this is where, like I said, the rulers we carry are Quilter Select, and we'll be getting Creative Grids back in, because a lot of people like the Creative Grids rulers. A couple other things to keep in mind when you're looking or shopping for rulers is, how are your markings? These are really nice. I don't know if it's coming through very well on the screen, but every 1/4 inch you actually have a white mark. Can you get it down on that and see if we can get a good shot? And this is, every ruler company is going to be a little bit different, but this is clearly marked at your 1/4 inch scale right there. You can see those white hash marks are each a 1/4 inch. And then, like I said, your half inch isn't marked specifically, because if you're cutting half inches, you can swap your the edge of your ruler, because that's the half inch side. And if I turn it around, that's the full inch side, because you can see it starts at the full inch from this edge here. And then you're clearly marked 1/4 inch. And then other nice thing about this ruler, you do have a 1/4 inch hash mark from the edge right here. So ruler markings are really important when you're shopping for rulers. A big part of it is how the rulers are marked. That's why Creative Grids are one of the better ones. They're marked really well. There's all sorts of stories of copyrights and lawsuits about them. I'm not that I've heard from other ruler manufacturers. But reason being is what the difference between two rulers, they're both plastic. What's really important is how the ruler's printed. So that's going to be something to look at, is how that ruler's printed. And like I said, this is one of Brenda's favorites. I would recommend, if you're watching this video and I've never sewn before, I need a ruler. Which I don't think anybody watching right now live has said that, but you might be on YouTube looking for hints about a new hobby you want to do. I'm going to tell you what I would do is the ruler you want to look for is this. This is by far the best, most versatile ruler out there. It's a 24.5 by 8.5. Most every ruler company makes one this size. It's very big. So this is if somebody comes in and says, I've never quilted before, this is the rule. I'm like, you got to get one of these, because if you don't buy any other ruler, this is the one that you can do most everything with this. The reason I like this ruler is there's a couple things. You can strip with this ruler because it's 24.5 inches. Most fabric is 44 inches wide, so that folded in half is 22 inches. So a 24.5 inch ruler is long enough to cut a strip of fabric without a problem. The problem with this ruler here, which again is Brenda's favorite, is it is not long enough to cut a strip of fabric. It's nice for small work, but you can't cut strips with it because it's too short. So that's why this is a really good ruler to start with. It's large, but because you can always go down in size, it's hard to extend a ruler to make it bigger. So if you're only going to buy one ruler, I would recommend a 24.5 by 8.5 or a 24.5 by 6.5. They do make this in a 6.5 is another real common size. I prefer the 8.5 because I have these giant gorilla Sasquatch mitts, so it works out well for me. Some people like the 6.5 to make it a little bit easier to hang on to. But this is, and we've got two, they come in two flavors. This is going to be your Creative Grids, and then this is what we currently have in stock, and we'll keep these in, is Quilter Select. Like we're talking about the markings on rulers. So you can see both these rulers are marked a little bit differently. They have all the same information, they're just marked differently. What you're going to find is the numbers on the Creative Grids much larger, much easier to read. The Quilter Select, not so easy to read, but the upside to the Quilter Select is the fact that they're smaller numbers means it interferes less when you're trying to read. If you're trying to read the line underneath the number, you get a little bit more precision with the Quilter Select if that's important. But a lot of people prefer the Creative Grids because of the larger number. You'll notice here we got the dark, that's coming from this side, and then you've got the lighter numbers coming from the opposite side. So you've also got, just as the Creative Grids is labeled for depending which side you're coming on, the Quilter Select is as well. The other thing that people really like about the Quilter Select is the reason that it kind of has that yellow tint is on the back there's a non-slip surface. So these are really nice because see how that moves on my fabric? That ruler is not going to move once you get it down. That's what really makes Quilter Select nice. Creative Grids has a little bit, but you can see not quite as good as the Quilter Select. So there's different trade-offs. The big thing I would look for is make sure you've got a ruler that has markings that you like, but then like I said, a lot of them are starting to have some sort of non-slip surface on the back. And we sell here at the store is some non-slip ruler grip. Oh yeah, that's backwards. Non-slip ruler grip. It's $4. You get there's enough stuff in here to do probably to fight a war with rulers because you don't need a lot of it on there. A good example of it is, where did I put? So Brenda, and then now we're going to get into the EasyAngle here in a minute. This, you'll notice, has these little tags, these little squares on the back. This is some non-skid stuff that was put on after the fact because Creative Grids out of the box have nothing on them. For a reason, because you actually Creative Grids, EasyAngles. EasyAngles, you actually use both sides of the EasyAngle, so they're not going to come with non-slip stuff. But Brenda put some on the back of hers, which is fine because that's the sides you mostly use. Makes a nice difference. But that's another thing when you're looking at the one ruler to rule them all. If you just want one ruler to work with, make sure it's marked good. And that that non-slip stuff is an important consideration. So these are the two big things when you're looking for a ruler is first off size. Like I said, if you're only going to buy one ruler, I would do 8.5 by 24 or 6.5 by 24. If you're only doing one, otherwise buy the ruler that's the appropriate size. The next thing is markings. Make sure the markings are easy to read and fairly precise. So a quality manufacturer is going to have good markings, and then the non-skid or non-slip surface on the back. That is another important consideration. It's not the end all be all because there are aftermarket parts, for lack of a better, to add to rulers to keep them from sliding. So those are things to consider when buying a ruler. Now you have all sorts of rulers for all sorts of other stuff. So we were just talking about basically cutting. That's EasyAngle is a specific tool for cutting a certain way. You have squares. Squares, there's a lot of specialty rulers that people like, and as somebody that sells them, I should be more like, hey, buy all the specialty rulers so I can make a buck off you. But I'm not going to lie to you. The problem with a lot of these specialty rulers that you're going to get out there is the fact that they're for very specific projects. And how many times you're going to make that same quilt that you need the weird looking ruler or template for. So that's something to keep in mind if you're really going to get into specialty rulers. The cost on some of them, it's hard to justify unless you're doing a much bigger quilt. Like I know that there was a set of rulers, for example, for the Tula Pink Nebula quilt. But those rulers, the way she's make those, there's a lot of pattern support for them. So it's not like you're going to use them once and be done with them. But that's one of the things that I always consider when I'm thinking about buying a ruler is how much am I going to use it, given the price of it. Because honestly, a lot of rulers, you don't need a special set of rulers. Like these were all the rage for quite a while, and I'm sure that people will still tell me they're awesome. I don't even really, I'm not even really sure if I want to do an overhead view. These are actually made for fussy cutting and squaring stuff up. So these great little rulers, you've got little notch marks here, so you can, center that on your fabric and cut around it. Fantastic little tool. I'm not saying they're not worth it. How often are you going to use them? Like I said, they were all the rage for a while. Some people still like them. But I am old school and I'm a cheap New Englander. So most of my fussy cutting I can do with one of these. Because if you see, I can line up and measure and figure out center points and all that stuff. Yes.
The orange pop rulers are more for embroidery.
Yes.
Not for fussy cutting. I mean, you could, but that's not what.
How would you use them for embroidery? I don't get it.
Well, because when you do a block, you have a tack down line.
So then you line up to the tack down line. I gotcha. I can see where it might be useful. I'm not saying it's not.
But it's a specific.
It's a very specific, and that kind of gets to my point that there's a lot of rulers out there with very, very specific uses, and you can spend hundreds, probably thousands of dollars on rulers. A good example of specialty rulers is this guy here. It's an add-a-quarter ruler. It's very specific for paper piecing, and it's a fantastic tool for the money. It's like $10 for a set of two of these. And what makes this ruler special is I'll show you. Is if you'll notice there on this side here, there's a little tiny. Let me get my fat fingers out of the way. There's you're gonna make them all seasick, and you're looking at my nasty chin. That little lip right there, that little lip is a 1/4 inch wide. So this gets used for paper piecing. You use this to get your 1/4 inch seam off of paper piecing. So this is a very specific ruler. When you see, hey, I need an add-a-quarter, it's gonna use specifically for paper piecing. What else do I have for specialty rulers? Oh, this is another one. This is kind of falls in the ruler realm. This is another real popular one. Again, it's a specialty tool, but it's one that you can use a lot once you get used to the technique. So this is another one that comes in super handy. I think they're called a magic wand or something. We've got a couple of them in stock. I'm going to show you how to use this. I don't use this at all. I prefer the EasyAngle over this. For what this does, it's a one-trick pony. Does it well, but I don't know that I don't use it a lot because like I said, I find the EasyAngle works a lot better for it. So that's another, here's another kind of specialty ruler. These, I'm not sure how I feel about these, I'm not gonna lie. These were, again, all the rage. People love these. I have cut a ton of quilts with these. This is a smaller version of the strip rulers. If you notice, if you look at it, you see that these grooves here are all strips, and there's a groove every 1/2 inch. So what you do is you flop this down and you can just run strips in the grooves, because you can see up here there's the slots a little bigger to fit your blade in. And some people love these. If you're doing a lot of strips, people swear by these. I've used them. They're not bad. If you're going to do a lot of strips, absolutely get one. But if you're only going to make one, if you're only cutting strips every now and then, you can cut 2.5 inch strips with this just as easy as you can do it with this. This is nice if you're cutting hundreds of them, though. So there is a point where this does make sense. But again, specialty rulers, there's a ton of them. There is a ton of specialty rulers out there, and if you're just learning to quilt, and honestly, if you've been quilting a while, every quilt I make, these are the only 2 rulers I use. 9 times out of 10, these are going to be the only rulers that I use to make a quilt. That's not to say I'm some sort of master quilter, but you can do 90% of your quilting with these 2 rulers. This one here is the one I take for granted a lot because it's been around forever. I think these have been around longer than my kid's been alive. I can tell you, I can say that with certainty. And people still buy them. It's one of the best tools available. I forget that people don't know how to use them. That was going to be the other half of this today. Is I was going to show you what the EasyAngle is good for, because I think everybody should have this in there. Because a lot of the rulers that I see, they're just reinventing the wheel with existing rulers, and you'll find that this one does a really good job. Yes, Jean just made a very good point. Deb Tucker 180 does fantastic rulers and templates. She does what's really nice about Deb Tucker's stuff is that they're not just, you don't have one quilt that she made with them and you're done. She has there's a lot of pattern support for her rulers. So that's what makes it, to me, that's what makes a specialty ruler nice, is if there's the pattern support for it to make it useful for more than just that one pattern that you bought it for. And definitely, Deb Tucker 180 designs are fantastic for that. All right. Have I rambled enough about rulers?
You did good.
Oh, here's another ruler. This one's interesting because you see what they did on this one is they shaded the 1/2 inch side green so you can't screw it up. The downside to cute cuts. The downside to cute cuts is there's no anti-slip stuff on it, so that's something to keep in mind. But cute cuts are fun. Eddie, They come in different colors, like the rectangles I believe are red, squares are all green. That's just another brand. There's tons of brands out there. I would say, personally, I will say that Creative Grids is probably the best ruler out there. From a vendor standpoint, they're a little bit of a pain in the butt to deal with, but they're good rulers. And Quilter Select, I did not want to like Quilter Select rulers. I just thought this was going to be another gimmick. These are fairly new to the market within the last 5 years or so. And I just why do we need another ruler? Why are we reinventing the ruler? And honestly, the non-slip portion of a Quilter Select ruler is fantastic. That really sold me on those. So without further ado, let's get into an EasyAngle. Why you should have one if you don't, and if you have one collecting dust, what you need to do with it to get more out of it. If you'll notice, on this quilt, we have a lot of what they call half-square triangles. Half-square triangles are any square that is made up of 2 triangles, hence half-square triangle. And you have those, and I don't know if you can't really tell the way that this is made, but these right here started out as half-square triangles, this section here, and then they added the ends to it. So this is a half-square triangle. This unit here is basically a half-square triangle with stripes in it. So I wanted to use this because we had the pattern printed off so I could show you what it looks like when you're getting ready to make something like this. And this is a freebie pattern, so I'm not going to feel bad for giving you a little bit of a preview of it. This is the pattern to make that panel. So a half-square triangle is one of these right here. See that square unit right there? It's made of 2 triangles. So when they talk about a half-square triangle, they're referring to 1/2 of that square. This is a very common unit when it comes to making quilts. There's a lot you can do with this. Once you start looking at quilt blocks, you'll notice that this and squares are probably 80% of every quilt, unless you get into paper piecing and other things. And there's a bunch of different ways to make this, but one thing that's important, and one thing that I always hated when I first learned to quilt, is this number right here. See that number right there? 4 7/8 of an inch. If you ever look at a ruler, 1/8 of an inch is 1/2 of a 1/4 of an inch. And you'll notice on this ruler, I'm going to put a ruler over here so you can see, 1/8 of an inch is that little line right there. And they want you to cut exactly at 7/8. So no ruler is really marked very well for 8ths. Most are marked pretty well for 1/2 and 1/4. But anytime you see a 7/8 measurement, 9 times out of 10, you can use an EasyAngle to get the cut you need and bring it down. So if it says 4 7/8, like this one says here, you can knock off 3/8. So if it's 4 7/8, knock it down to 4 1/2. That's why I love the EasyAngle, because cutting a 4 1/2 inch square is a whole lot less tedious than cutting a 4 7/8 inch square. Yes.
Why wouldn't you round up?
I'm going to show you that.
Okay.
Because that really bothered me when I learned this.
Okay.
This really, really bothered me. I'm like, where did that 3/8 of an inch go? It doesn't just disappear. Why does it go away and it still comes out right? It did. I'll be honest, and I'll show it to you. It's once you see this, and like I said, this is specifically for the easy angle. So if I see a 4 7/8 inch measurement, I know I'm making a half, and I'm going to have to cut 2 squares, 4 7/8, put them together. And what they always have you do is you line them up together, then you cut the middle out, and then you sew 1/4 inch on each side, fold them out to get 2 different units, 2 square units. So all you have to do when you see a 7/8 inch measurement on your directions is you're not going to even cut a square. You're going to cut a strip. All I'm going to do to show this, so I said 4 7/8. I can tell you 4 7/8 square is going to come out to 4.5 inch finished.
I ironed it.
Okay, it's going to come out to 4.5 inches finished, and so we're going to start finished rough, because you know a 4.5 inch unfinished square finishes up to 4 once you put your 1/4 inch seams on it. So if if you want your finished square to be 4 inches, your rough block is 4.5 inches. And I think I probably just confused a lot of people saying all this, but so what you want to do, if you ever see 4 7/8, you know that your finished square is going to be 4.5. That's going to be your finished rough size is 4.5. And this works really well if you're trying to do your own quilt and you know you've got to do 4.5 inch half square triangles to make your quilt work. All you need to do is cut 4.5 inch strips. So all I'm going to do is cut a 4.5 inch strip here. Notice I'm using the ergo cut, so I can cut this sitting down, as we discussed in last week's video. And then I'm going to cut of my other piece, because you're always, whatever you see 4 7/8, you're cutting 2 squares that are the same size. And I'm going to actually do this both ways so you can kind of see how this works. And as I line this up, this is my 4.5 mark right here. I'm just going to line that up as kind of a basic rule of thumb. Always measure off of the ruler, disregard the measurements on the mat. That's just a good rule of thumb. There's a few times when you need a measurement that's beyond that of any ruler, then you use the mat, but always use the ruler, never the mat, when it comes to figuring out your measurement. So right here I'm on, this is my 1/2 inch edge, so I'm coming out here to 4.5 inches. So that's what makes this ruler really nice to work with. So I'm going to take a 4.5 inch strips, and instead of cutting out, if I was going to do this the way that the pattern wants me to do it, I would have cut these at 4 7/8, and then I would cut them down. I'm just going to do it at 4.5 so you can see how their method works. I would cut 2 of these, and I'm going to show you why this other one. You're going to cut 2 of those, you put them right sides together, kaboom, like so. And then I would, if I was going to do it like the directions tell me to, I would cut that, and then sew a 1/4 inch from that edge, and I'd end up with a 4.5 inch square. That, if you're going to do that technique, some people do like this. That's where this guy comes in. You can put this down here, and the idea is you run it from tip to tip, like so, and then you take a pen and you mark your center point like that. So you have this mark here, and then you line up your 1/4 inch guide and you sew this before you cut it. So that's where this comes in handy. Some people really like this for that. It's a different technique. That's why I don't use this, because I'd rather use an easy angle. But the idea behind this, that's how you'd make a half square. You would actually draw that in first, sew it, and then cut it. Makes for a little bit more precise for some people. But for the way these directions have you do it is they're gonna, in fact, yeah, they actually have you draw it in before you cut it, sew it, and then cut it. But I a lot of times will just cut it and sew it, because that's how I roll. But that's how that works with an easy angle. So now, if I was doing I saw 4 7/8, and I know that I'm finishing out at 4.5, so I cut 2 4.5 inch strips. Yeah, because I'm going to use my easy angle. And all you do with an easy angle, all an easy angle basically has done is figured your 1/4 inch seam into your triangle. So all I'm going to do now is, this is actually a 4.5 inch easy angle, so I'm just going to put it right on there. But if you didn't have a 4.5 inch, this is a bigger one, so you can see, like, if you're using something smaller. If you'll notice, there's a 4.5 inch mark here. I'm going to line that up with the bottom and that up with the edge there. And all I'm going to do is cut that right there. And then if I run a 1/4 inch seam, if I run a 1/4 inch seam up here, that's going to give me, and then here's the third size easy angle. So they come in 4 different sizes. If you're only going to have one, I recommend the 6.5. I do use the 4.5 a lot for bindings, and this gets used for piecing borders and stuff. So if I run a 1/4 inch seam up here now, that will then fold out to give me my square if I was to sew that. And that square is going to measure 4.5 inches because the EasyAngle, the whole idea, like I said, it gives me that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, the question is, where did that 3/8 of an inch go? That is the $1 million question, because that used to drive me insane. And I'll show you where that goes. If you look at, and then all you do is, so we've already cut one, and watch the magic of the EasyAngle. So that's our 1 square, and all we do now is we work our way down this, so we just cut this one here, so then we just flip this over. That's why I said sometimes you're going to use both sides of it. And now my 4.5 inches is up here. I'm lined up with that there, and then I'm just going to cut. There's one, and then I'm just going to flip it back over, line up that edge there, line my 4.5 inch on the bottom, and I just work my way down the strip. So I didn't have to cut individual squares just to cut them down into triangles. I'm cutting my squares as I go out of the strip. Now here, I'm going to show you where your 3/8 of an inch would be, because then it'll all make sense. You're like, oh, look at the magic. Now these were cut from 4.5 inch squares. So these, if we were to sew these are going to come out smaller than those, because what happens is, if you'll notice on the EasyAngle, the way the EasyAngle works, you're only going to have dog ears on one side. You see how that's cut there, and that one's straight? And this one, though, we just cut it in half. How we have the points on both of those, and here are the other EasyAngle ones we cut. Put that over here so you can kind of see it. Is what happens is that 3/8 of an inch is the dog ear that you don't have on one side. That's why you can go down in size, because you'll see when you sew this together, you're going to have a dog ear on this side but not on that side, because your 1/4 inch seam starts right at that point there, folds out nice. This one, if this was cut at 7/8, you'll notice I've got points on both sides, so I'll have dog ears on both sides. So that's where the 3/8 of an inch goes. That's the magic of the EasyAngle. All right, now here's the other thing the EasyAngle is awesome for. Like I said, this is one of the, I take this ruler for granted so often because I use it all the time, and I think everybody knows how to use it. Say you're doing, I don't know, a binding. We all love bindings. So, and we're going to do a 2.5 inch binding. Now, one of the problems with binding, if you do a binding, and see, some of this stuff is geared at like beginner quilters. So if you're getting bored, I'm sorry. So you're doing a 2.5 inch binding. One of the things you always keep in mind for doing bindings is the fact that if you do a straight seam on bindings, so if I just butt these two pieces together like this, right sides together, sew my 1/4 inch up that seam, fold this out like that. The reason that you don't do a straight seam on binding is the first thing you do after you make your binding is you then fold it in half, right? You fold it, you iron it in half, then you attach it to your quilt, and then you fold that over the quilt again. Look at what that has done on that seam. That's a bump. That's going to be a bump. Every seam is going to be super thick like that. So one of the things that everybody that makes binding understands is that you piece it at a diagonal so you don't have that bulk. We do have a binding class this week, don't we?
I don't remember.
I know that we were supposed to put it on the calendar and I never got to it. And I know that I'm... Yes. We have a binding class tomorrow. So you want to see this. Binding class tomorrow.
I'm sorry.
I was supposed to have put an email out, and that makes... And we're going to do it again in April, because April, I was taking March off. How's that for an excuse? So if you're going to do if you're going to do binding, you actually want to piece these together at an angle, so as you fold everything over, you don't have that bulk there. Now, what a lot of people will do, this is again, some people will use this magic wand thing. This is the magic wand. What they'll do is they'll drop this on here, and this is a different technique. So they'll take this magic wand, and they'll line it up from corner to corner here, draw a line, and then sew on that line. Or some people actually just use a ruler too. They'll just draw a line and sew on the line. So me, I'm lazy, and the whole thing of getting a ruler out and drawing things is just an extra step. If you take your EasyAngle what you do is you just put that on here, line that right up. This is a 2.5 inch, so I'm gonna put my 2.5 up in that corner there, line that right up, and then you just chop off that corner. What that does, like I said, all the EasyAngle did was give us our 1/4 inch seam. So now if I do a 1/4 inch from there, you'll see up here, that 1/4 inch should line right up with that point, come across there, and then this will fold out nice and perfect like that. So the EasyAngle, about 5 years ago, there was a binding tool that was all the rage. Had like instructions printed on it. My mom sold a bunch of them. She'd demo them, people would buy them. And then people would come in trying to use them. How do I use this? And I don't know. And then I pull out my EasyAngle and do everything the binding tool did and more. And so, like I said, there's always different gimmicks, but the EasyAngle is a must-have in your toolbox. And the reason that you might get the big one is if you're piecing borders, you have a large border. A lot of people like to piece their borders at an angle so that the seams aren't as harsh and aren't as noticeable. So you can do the same thing that we just did with this binding with up to a 10.5 inch strips with the large EasyAngle. So the EasyAngle has a lot of uses. If you ever come in and want us to finish bindings for you, yeah, another for you, Eddie. If you ever want us to finish bindings for you, you're going to notice that we use the EasyAngle to finish bindings and bring them together. The EasyAngle has a lot of uses. You can use it for flying geese. If you want to do flying geese, I think you cut a 6 and 2 3.5s, and you cut the wings off. There's a bunch of techniques for it. It is definitely, like I said, if you're new to quilting, you need one of these and you need this with a rotary cutter that we talked about last week and a cutting mat, and you're off to the races and having fun. You can add to that, of course, but that would be the basics. Actually, I do this one here. The 6.5 is, if you're only going to have one EasyAngle, this is the one to get. If you're going to have all three, get all three. I do use this one a lot for bindings, but I can still use this one for bindings. So if I was going to be cheap and only had one, it'd be the 6.5. The problem with going straight to the giant one is that you'll notice down here, there's no markings under 2.5. So that does limit this one a little bit. So that's kind of all I wanted to get into today was the basics of rulers. Like I said, just to recap, if you're looking to buy rulers, size is the first thing. If you're only going to have one ruler, the bigger the better. The next thing you want
That's what she said.
That's why we missed you last week. So if you're only going to have one ruler, the bigger the better. The next thing you want to look at is markings on the ruler. Like I said, Creative Grids and Quilter Select are two of our favorites, but there's other brands out there. You don't have to buy just what we're telling you to buy. Those are the two that I like a lot. And then the other thing you want to look at is also some sort of non-slip surface. And that's something you can add after the fact. If you find a ruler that you absolutely love and the markings are perfect and it does everything you want it to, but there's no non-slip coating on it, that's easy enough to fix. The big thing is, like I said, the size. Make sure you've got a ruler that's big enough to do what you need it to. But the markings are very important, and that's gonna vary from ruler manufacturer to ruler manufacturer. That's kind of what separates the expensive ones from the less expensive ones is going to be your markings. And don't get sucked. And the other thing when we're talking about rulers, don't get sucked into like all of the gimmicky. Like I said, the binding tool. I think of that, and I'm probably going to get me in trouble with somebody, I'm sure. But the binding tool looked great. Look at a great new tool. All it was a repackaged EasyAngle that wasn't nearly as versatile because it was only 2.5 inches wide. There's a lot of rulers out there, a lot of templates. If you do like template work and ruler work, definitely look at like Deb Tucker's 360, Studio 180. That's a great series of rulers, works fantastic. Marty Michelle used to do a lot of template work. Hers are very interesting. I don't know that's kind of an old school. I think you're starting to see also from an industry standpoint, since I'm rambling, I might as well go. You're starting to see, like I'll use Marty Mitchell as an example. We used to do a lot of her stuff. Her stuff is fantastic. But if you start to look at what her templates were doing, a lot of that is now reproduced very easily on a Cricut or a scan and cut. So these specialty rulers to make these very specialty blocks, it's much cheaper, way more cost effective to buy yourself a cutting machine than to invest in all of these specific template type rulers to make these specific blocks. Look for, if you're looking at a ruler, don't get sucked into this. You got to buy this template set of $60 for a template set that you're going to make this specific block when you could spend a couple $100 on a Cricut or a scan and cut and cut that set of blocks out in a whole lot more. So templates, like I said, I really think templates as a templates as an alternative to rulers, you're going to start seeing a lot of less of that because of the technology that's out there. But rulers for like the EasyAngle, for measuring, cutting strips, squares, and all that, there's, find what works for you. It's a very personal, like I said, you're going to find stuff works better. You're going to like some stuff better than others. But definitely, you're going to want at least this, a 24.5 by 6.5 or an 8.5. Brenda's favorite ruler and Wilma's favorite ruler is this little guy here. You definitely want a little ruler. Once you get into it, if you're just starting out, you only want one ruler, get this one. This would be my second rectangular ruler, would be this, or even a square. Something like that, because you can use these to square things up. These are great for squaring things up. A lot of people buy these giant square rulers to square stuff up. These rulers, an 8.5 by 24.5, will square anything up very easily. I hardly ever get out the big. We used to have an 18.5. We had a 22.5 inch square here once. It was fantastic and it was awesome, but it was a giant piece of plastic. This did most everything it did with a third the space. And then, of course, like I said, I would definitely want an EasyAngle. I would guess that most everybody watching this right now probably has an EasyAngle, and if you're not using it, you should, unless you're not doing the quilts that need half square triangles. And that's pretty much all I've got. And what you're going to find, especially if you get into quilting, they reinvent how to do half square triangles all the time. There's a million different techniques out there to do half square triangles. I've tried a lot of them. Some of them are better than others. The Studio 180, it does an interesting where she tends to oversize things and then you trim them down, so you get really precise that way. I am not a precise quilter, so I like my EasyAngle. I just chop it and go. And I know that's not for everybody, but it works for me. You can always cut. You can also oversize with the EasyAngle as well and cut down. But there's other, fangles. There's all sorts of different techniques I've seen for this half square triangle, and I always come back to the EasyAngle every time. And I'm sure if Becky was here, she'd tell me there's a reason why it's not the best, but because she's not, I'm going to say it is the best. Buy an EasyAngle.
Share, subscribe.
Share, yeah, because we're over 450 subscribers.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, the remix, I guess, really put us over the edge. And if you haven't seen that, if you're just tuning in live, you have not seen the fantastic remix that Eddie put together, it's well worth it. I look like a fool in it, but it made me laugh. So, anyway, thanks for watching another episode of Shenanigans with Brent. And join us again next week at the same time, and so on, and be excellent to each other.